Imagine stepping into the bustling streets of Rome nearly 2,000 years ago. The air is thick with the scent of olive oil and roasted meat. Merchants call out prices. Sandals slap against marble roads polished by countless footsteps. Above the chaos, statues of gods and emperors gaze down in silent judgment. But beneath this grand facade of empire, beneath the laws and legions, another Rome lives. A Rome of private passion, secret rendezvous, and love that dared to exist outside the rigid lines of tradition. Tonight, I will take you there. You may think of ancient Rome as a place of stoic soldiers and strict patriarchs, of emperors draped in purple and gladiators fighting to the death. Yet in the shadows of its colonnades and the glow of its bathhouses, men loved men, women loved women, and desire flowed in ways both celebrated and condemned. Love in Rome was never just love. It was a question of power, status, and identity. To understand Roman sexuality, we must strip away our modern labels and step into their world as they saw it. Close your eyes. Picture a young Roman patrician, wealthy, educated, and ambitious. He might take a male lover, often a younger man or a beautiful slave, and no one would question his masculinity so long as he remained the active partner. To be penetrated, however, to surrender that role, was to risk mockery and disgrace. In Rome, the body was political, and desire could lift you high or drag you into scandal. Women, too, found ways to seek one another in whispered secrecy. Ancient poets like Martial and Juvenal mocked them with biting satire, yet their very words prove such love existed. Some were powerful enough to live openly, most were not. The empire's marble villas and perfumed gardens kept many stories hidden, stories that history nearly lost. Over the centuries, as Rome transformed from a republic to an empire and finally to a Christian stronghold, attitudes toward same-sex love shifted dramatically. What was once tolerated, even expected among the elite, became shadowed by law and moral fear. By the time the empire fell, these loves had been pushed underground, surviving only in scandalous gossip and banned poetry. This is not just a tale of who slept with whom. It's a story about freedom and control, about how a civilization defined manhood and honor, about the intimate lives that shaped an empire, and then were almost erased. As we walk together through this history, I will show you how love and power collided in the most unexpected ways. From the palaces of emperors like Hadrian, who openly adored his companion Antinous, to the crowded bathhouses where slaves and senators crossed paths, to the voices of women whose desire dared to defy silence. This is Rome as you've never seen it, raw, human, and alive with longing. Walk with me now, deeper into the heart of the Roman world. The streets hum with life senators in white togas, merchants balancing amphorae, slaves darting between doorways. In this society of ranks and rituals, sexuality is not a private secret but a mirror of status and power. To understand Roman same-sex love, we must first understand how Romans defined a man, and how desire could affirm or endanger that identity. The Roman ideal of masculinity, the vir, was rooted in dominance, political dominance, social dominance, and yes, sexual dominance. A vir was expected to take, to act, to penetrate. To be the penetrated was to risk being labeled soft, effeminate, even dishonorable. This concept was so ingrained that Roman insults often targeted a man's supposed passivity in bed. Poets hurled the word senatus. Roughly, man who takes the woman's part, like a dagger. But here's the paradox: same-sex intimacy itself was not taboo. A Roman man could sleep with male partners, so long as those partners were of lower status: slaves, freedmen, prostitutes, or foreigners. The shame lay not in desire, but in surrender. A freeborn Roman citizen was supposed to rule, even in the bedroom. Much of this mindset came from Greece, but with a Roman twist. In Athens, the relationship between an older man's Erastus and a younger one's Eromenos was seen as part of education and mentorship. Rome inherited the idea but stripped it of Greek philosophy and ritual. By the late Republic, wealthy Romans often kept beautiful Greek slaves or freedmen as lovers, sometimes even showing them off. Yet Romans mocked Greeks for what they saw as softness. They would enjoy the practice, but disdain its sentimentality. Consider Marcus, a fictional but typical young aristocrat of the 1st century BCE. Raised in a house filled with Greek tutors, he learns rhetoric, politics, and Homer, and also that his father keeps a handsome Greek secretary as a companion. When Marcus turns 16, his friends tease him. Will he buy his own slave lover? No one questions the act itself. The gossip is only about taste and discretion. Roman literature preserves many such hints. The satirist Martial teases friends about their handsome boy slaves. Juvenal ridicules senators who secretly take passive roles. Cicero, in his letters, accuses political rivals of effeminacy to undermine their authority. These aren't modern, gay jokes. They're battles over manhood and dominance. And what of love? Could a Roman man truly love another? The answer is complicated. Passion, yes. Obsession, certainly. But equal partnership, the kind of romantic ideal we cherish today, was rare and even suspect because it implied equality. A freeborn citizen was not supposed to be emotionally enslaved. Yet there were exceptions, and those exceptions could be legendary. One such legend is that of Julius Caesar and King Nicomedes of Bithynia. Roman gossip claimed Caesar, in his youth, was the queen of Bithynia, having submitted to the foreign king. His enemies never let him forget it, hurling the insult in the Senate decades later. Caesar, the greatest general of his age, could shrug off many things, but the accusation of passivity haunted him because it struck at the core of Roman manhood. Even emperors were not immune. Suetonius, the gossipy biographer, describes the loves of men like Nero, who married a freedman named Pythagoras, but as the husband, not the wife. Nero also married Sporus, a boy he had castrated and dressed as a bride. To Romans, this was scandalous not because it was two males, but because Nero blurred the lines of power and gender. Bathhouses were another world where these dynamics played out. Roman baths were social hubs, places to exercise, gossip, and sometimes find lovers. Freedmen might seek the patronage of senators there, slaves might be chosen for secret affairs. Yet the etiquette remained a citizen could pursue, but not be pursued. Graffiti in Pompeii preserves crude jokes and names, some carved by men boasting of their conquests with other men, others mocking rivals for playing the passive role. Women's same, sex love is harder to trace but no less real. In a society obsessed with controlling female sexuality, women who loved women left fewer records, yet traces remain. Ovid, in his Ars Amatoria, advises men on seducing women, but slyly warns of rivals who might be female. Martial teases women who prefer other women. Juvenal, ever scathing, describes aristocratic women who take brides of their own. These mentions are often mocking, but they prove the existence of such love. Behind the satire, there must have been lives, quiet liaisons in gardens, whispered vows in candlelit rooms. Still, freedom for women was even narrower. A Roman matron was expected to be chaste and devoted to her husband, for her to seek pleasure elsewhere, with anyone, let alone another woman, could risk scandal or worse. Yet in elite circles, wealth and power sometimes shielded women. The poet Sulpicia writes of passionate love, though we cannot know if her beloved was male or female. Her voice feels intimate, daring, and deeply human. As the Republic gave way to empire, these dynamics persisted but grew more complex. Emperors set the tone, and each had his own approach. Augustus, the first emperor, promoted strict morals to stabilize Rome, discouraging public scandal but tolerating private vice. Tiberius was rumored to keep a retreat full of young lovers. Hadrian, by contrast, would make history for his devotion to one man Antinous. Hadrian's story deserves its own chapter, for it marks perhaps the most famous same-sex romance of the Roman world, one powerful enough to inspire a god. Hadrian's story begins far from the marble streets of Rome, in the rugged province of Hispania, where he was born in 76 CE. From the start, Hadrian was different from the hard, practical Roman ideal. He loved Greek culture with an almost obsessive passion. its language, its philosophy, its art. When he rose to power and became emperor in 117 CE, he carried this love across the empire, rebuilding cities in classical style and surrounding himself with poets, philosophers, and artists. And among these companions was one extraordinary young man, Antinous. Antinous was a boy from Bithynia, a region on the empire's eastern edge, in what is now modern Turkey. He entered Hadrian's household while still very young, probably as part of the emperor's entourage of pages and attendants. Ancient sources tell us little about his origins, but what we know suggests he was strikingly beautiful and gentle in manner. Hadrian met him when the boy was around 13 or 14, and over the following years Antinous became not just a favored servant, but the emperor's beloved. For a Roman emperor to love a young man was not shocking by itself. What was unusual was the depth of Hadrian's affection, and how openly he showed it. The two traveled together across the empire, appearing side by side in public ceremonies. Antinous was no mere secret pleasure. He was a companion in politics, art, and even religion. Statues of Antinous began to appear, first discreetly, then everywhere in marble, bronze, and painted fresco. Sculptors carved him as a new Ganymede, the beautiful youth carried to heaven by Zeus, or as a young god himself, draped in flowing robes and crowned with ivy. The turning point came in 130 CE, during Hadrian's grand tour of Egypt. The emperor and his court sailed up the Nile, visiting ancient temples and meeting local priests. Somewhere along that journey, disaster struck. Antinous drowned in the Nile under mysterious circumstances. Some ancient writers hint that it may have been an accident. Others whisper of ritual sacrifice, that the boy gave his life to prolong Hadrian's. We will never know the truth. What we do know is that Hadrian was devastated. Roman emperors were supposed to be stern and unshakable, but Hadrian wept, withdrew from his retinue, and for a time seemed lost in grief. Then he did something no emperor had done before. He deified his lost lover. Hadrian declared Antinous a god. He founded a city on the Nile, Antinopolis, in the boy's honor. He ordered temples built, priests appointed, and games held each year to celebrate Antinous' memory. Across the empire, statues of the beautiful youth sprang up like wildflowers in Rome, in Greece, in Syria, in Britain. Coins were minted with his face. Mystery cults dedicated to Antinous grew, blending Greek, Egyptian, and Roman traditions. Ordinary people prayed to him for healing and protection. In some places, his worship lasted for centuries. This was more than love. It was an act of defiance. Roman tradition accepted that an emperor might have male lovers, but to raise one to godhood was shocking. Hadrian didn't care. He used the full weight of imperial power to make Antinous immortal, and in doing so, he left behind one of the clearest testaments to same-sex devotion in all antiquity. Even today, the serene face of Antinous, curls falling softly over his brow, lips caught between boyhood and manhood, is one of the most reproduced images from the ancient world. Yet while Hadrian's grief created a god, the moral winds in Rome were beginning to shift. The empire was changing. For centuries, Rome's view of same-sex relations had been pragmatic and tied to hierarchy, but under the influence of new philosophies, and increasingly the growing Christian movement, people began to speak of sexuality in moral terms, not just social ones. Stoic thinkers like Musonius Rufus and Seneca preached self, control, and virtue, warning against lust of any kind. Jewish communities within the empire, rooted in the Hebrew Bible's prohibitions, condemned same-sex acts. And Christianity, still a persecuted sect but spreading fast, would soon bring a new and powerful vision that all sexual acts outside procreative marriage were sinful. The change started quietly. Augustus had already promoted a moral revival a century earlier, encouraging traditional marriage and punishing adultery to strengthen the family. Later emperors such as Domitian and Trajan reinforced these ideals. They didn't outlaw same-sex desire outright, but they tightened the rules. A free Roman man who allowed himself to be penetrated could be disgraced or barred from office. Same Sex weddings, like those staged mockingly by Nero, became objects of scandal. By the late 3rd and early 4th century, as Christianity gained imperial favor, the tone hardened. The Emperor Constantine, though not yet making sweeping bans, embraced Christian advisors who frowned on the sexual freedoms of the pagan past. His successors went further. In 342 CE, Constantius Severin Constans issued one of the first known Roman laws explicitly condemning male same-sex unions, declaring that men who married other men should be burned alive. A few decades later, the Emperor Theodosius, who made Christianity the empire's official religion, added new penalties, treating certain same-sex acts as capital crimes. These edicts didn't erase desire. Love and lust don't vanish when laws change, but they push such relationships into secrecy. What had once been joked about openly in poetry now became something whispered, hidden behind closed doors. The proud masculinity of the early empire gave way to a moral climate where any same-sex act could mark a man as sinful and corrupt. Yet echoes of the old world persisted. In art, the image of Antinous remained beloved even among Christians, admired for his beauty if not his story. Scholars and poets, copying ancient manuscripts, preserved the verses of Martial and Juvenal. The gossip about Caesar and Nicomedes survived, though now colored with moral disdain. And in private, people still loved whom they loved, as they always have. For women, the silence grew even deeper. The few satirical references we have, Martial's teasing epigrams, Juvenal's bitter lampoons, almost disappear after the Christianization of the empire. The lives of women who loved women were swallowed by the new morality and the male-controlled record of history. We can only guess at their hidden networks of affection and desire. Still, the transformation was not instantaneous. Late antique Rome was a vast, diverse place. In some cities, especially in the East where Greek culture remained strong, older patterns of same-sex companionship endured. In others, bishops thundered from pulpits against unnatural acts, reshaping popular opinion. Law and religion began a long alliance that would define sexuality in Europe for centuries. Looking back, the arc is striking from a world where status, not gender, governed desire, to one where moral codes, especially Christian codes, sought to regulate the intimate lives of all. The Rome that had once built temples to a dead emperor's beloved boy would soon become the Rome of popes, where such love was condemned. And yet, history has a way of keeping its secrets alive. Walk through any major museum today, and you will see Antinous everywhere, in busts, reliefs, coins. His face survived the fall of Rome, the rise of Christianity, the Middle Ages, and the modern world. His story whispers that love, even when silenced, leaves traces too strong to erase. Even as emperors and philosophers debated virtue and morality, life in Rome continued with all its private passions. The streets hummed not only with politics and commerce, but with whispers of desire. In the bustling marketplaces, wealthy men might glance at a handsome slave boy, noting his posture, his jawline, the way he carried a basket of figs. Such attention was expected, almost casual, but every glance carried meaning. Who approached whom, and in what way, reflected social rank more than affection. A freeborn man could desire, but he could not surrender. A slave or freedman might offer himself, yet his choice was circumscribed by the invisible chains of hierarchy. Bathhouses were arenas of both hygiene and intimacy. Marble pools reflected the summer sun, and steam curled through the vaulted ceilings. Here, a senator might meet a young page from the provinces, their conversations slipping from philosophy to poetry to subtle propositions. Some men approached with caution, aware that a single misstep could ruin their reputation. Others, emboldened by status, flaunted their companionships openly within these walls. Murmurs of these encounters echoed across mosaics and graffitive crude jokes, declarations of conquest, and even expressions of affection. One wall in Pompeii reads simply, "Gaius loves his boy, always," a small but enduring testament to private devotion. The poetry of the era also preserved a world of same-sex love. Martial's epigrams teased those who had fallen for youthful slaves or companions, but his words, sharp with humor, hint at genuine intimacy and desire. Juvenal scorned men who allowed themselves to be dominated, but his satires reveal, almost inadvertently, the pervasiveness of these relationships. Even Ovid, in his Ars Amatoria, offered guidance on romantic pursuits, warning of rivals who might be women or men, proving that desire crossed genders in Rome, though it was measured always by hierarchy. Women's love for women, by contrast, remained largely invisible but not absent. Wealthy women sometimes found freedom to pursue one another in gardens, libraries, and secluded courtyards. Letters, satirical poems, and a few surviving inscriptions suggest clandestine networks of affection. The poet Sulpicia wrote of passion and longing, her voice intimate and daring, leaving hints that female desire, though restricted by law and custom, persisted in quiet defiance. These relationships, however, were almost never recorded with the same frankness as those between men. History's chroniclers were mostly men, and women's secrets were harder to preserve. Outside private spheres, Roman law and morality created boundaries for expression. Freeborn men could not legally be passive partners; their social power depended on dominance. Slaves, foreigners, and entertainers were exceptions. Public shame could be swift and brutal, and gossip could destroy a man's career. The moral code was not absolute, however; it was a negotiation, constantly shifting with each emperor's preferences, philosophical trends, and local customs. For example, while Augustus promoted chastity and marital fidelity, he tolerated male companionships discreetly. Domitian, stricter and more authoritarian, punished perceived effeminacy among citizens, yet he indulged in private vices. This balance of power and pleasure defined Roman sexuality at its core. Even as Rome became increasingly Christian, these practices survived in pockets, hidden from official scrutiny. In the East, Greek cultural influence persisted, preserving older attitudes toward mentorship and affection between men. Statues, frescoes, and coins carried traces of same-sex devotion long after the laws condemned it. Graffiti preserved private confessions. Lucius loves Marcus, or Julia kisses her friend every dawn. These small markings, often scratched into walls or etched onto pottery, speak of lives lived quietly but fully, resisting erasure. Religion, too, offered both constraint and possibility. Temples to traditional gods sanctioned male bonding in the context of ritual, while cults like that of Antinous celebrated same-sex devotion with almost sacred reverence. Festivals provided temporary freedoms; young men and women could flirt, dance, and display affection in ways usually forbidden by social norms. Music, poetry recitation, and theatrical performances allowed expression under the guise of art. Desire, though policed, found its way into every corner of Roman life. As centuries passed and the empire contracted under external pressure, these patterns adapted. Laws became stricter. Moral philosophers dictated private behavior. Bishops preached against the sins of the flesh. Yet in kitchens, bedrooms, and hidden courtyards, men and women continued to love as they had always loved. Letters, poems, and ephemeral objects, rings, small statuettes, tokens of affection, carried the memory of lives that official history often ignored. By the fall of Rome in the 5th century, overt acceptance had vanished, but private devotion endured, quietly threading through the ruins of empire, leaving echoes that would resurface in art, literature, and modern scholarship. The story of Rome's lovers is thus not merely a catalogue of acts, but a testament to human resilience, desire, and creativity. From the emperor's court to the narrow alleys of provincial towns, from luxurious villas to bustling bathhouses, love navigated the complex web of power, gender, and social expectation. It adapted, persisted, and in some ways triumphed long after empires fell and new moral orders arose. To trace these lives is to see the pulse of Rome itself, passionate, hierarchical, flawed, and undeniably human. Even as Rome's walls rose and fell, the private lives of its citizens pulsed with quiet intensity. Outside the gaze of senators, priests, and emperors, love and desire continued in ways both ordinary and extraordinary. In the villas of the elite, young men trained in rhetoric or philosophy might capture the attention of wealthy patrons. The hierarchies of Roman society dictated the rules. A freeborn youth could be admired and pursued, but the citizen's honor required him to remain the active partner. Yet even within these constraints, affection and longing found room to flourish. A hand brushed on a marble stairway, a stolen glance across a colonnade, a whispered poem recited under candlelight. All these small acts were declarations of intimacy, subtle yet enduring. Women, long constrained by laws and social expectations, navigated desire in more hidden ways. Aristocratic matrony might hold private gatherings in gardens or libraries, exchanging letters or poetry with female companions. In these shadows, the bonds of love and friendship intertwined with secrecy and careful strategy, while male poets mocked them. These jabs only prove their existence. Juvenal's satirical verses and Martial's teasing epigrams hint at women daring to love in ways forbidden by public convention. Sulpicia's fragments, preserved by chance, echo with intimate longing, and inscriptions on tombs or personal objects offer glimpses of bonds carefully preserved in silence. Public life and private passion intersected in unexpected places. Festivals, theatrical performances, and religious ceremonies provided rare opportunities for fleeting freedoms. At certain events, youth could dance together, flirt, and display affection, momentarily blurring the rigid lines of status and gender. In marketplaces, young slaves and freedmen sometimes caught the eyes of patricians, and such glances could blossom into clandestine encounters. Even graffiti, etched into walls, scratched into pottery, or painted on frescoes, became a record of love's persistence. Messages like, "Gaius loves Marcus forever," or "Julia's heart belongs to Cornelia," survive centuries, small yet defiant voices speaking across time. The growing influence of Christianity reshaped the moral landscape. Early Christian writers condemned same-sex acts as sinful, and as the religion spread, laws gradually enforced these prohibitions. By the 4th century, emperors like Constantine and his successors implemented penalties against male unions, aligning Roman law with Christian morality. While the threat of punishment forced many relationships into secrecy, desire itself did not vanish. Lovers adapted meetings, moved to private homes. Letters and gifts became substitutes for public displays, and stories of past devotion were preserved in art and memory. Art became a crucial medium for continuity. Statues of Antinous remained admired, frescoes and mosaics preserved intimate scenes. Coins and reliefs depicted youth and beauty in ways that transcended moral restrictions. These objects, tangible remnants of past passions, offered a quiet affirmation love had not been extinguished. In literature, the verses of Martial, Ovid, and Juvenal circulated among the educated elite, maintaining knowledge of Rome's once fluid sexual norms. Scholars copying texts in monasteries inadvertently preserved glimpses of a world where desire was negotiated, codified, and celebrated. The fall of Rome in the 5th century did not end these stories, it dispersed them. In provincial towns and rural villas, the memory of same-sex love persisted through oral traditions, private correspondence, and art. Women's secret networks continued to exist, invisible to the male-dominated historical record, but no less real. The lives of ordinary men and women, slaves and citizens alike, carried the pulse of desire, demonstrating resilience against law, moral decree, and historical erasure. In reflecting on this vast tapestry, one sees that Rome's story is more than conquests and politics. It is a story of intimacy, hierarchy, and adaptation. From the grandeur of the emperor's court to the narrow alleyways of provincial towns, from luxurious bathhouses to humble domestic quarters, love navigated the intricate web of social status, gender expectations, and legal restriction. It survived transformations, moral strictures, and even the collapse of the empire, leaving traces in art, literature, and human memory. The endurance of these private lives speaks to a universal truth. desire, affection, and love persist even under the harshest constraints. Rome may have fallen, its emperors and laws reduced to history books and ruins, yet the intimate stories of its citizens, men and women, masters and slaves, continue to resonate. Graffiti on a Pompeian wall, a fragment of Sulpicius' poetry, a statue of Antinous, or a fleeting reference in a satirical epigram, all are whispers of a world that defied erasure. And as we uncover them today, we glimpse the raw, human reality behind the grand narratives of empire, a reality defined not just by conquest, politics, or power, but by the enduring, irrepressible heart of desire. Even as centuries passed and the empire crumbled into ruins, the echoes of love in Rome never disappeared. Statues of Antinous continued to gaze silently from museum halls and temple remnants, his serene beauty immortalized in marble and bronze. Each sculpture, each relief, whispered stories of desire, affection, and devotion, a defiance of time and history. To the modern eye, these images are art. To the Romans, they were intimate symbols of love, memory, and, sometimes, rebellion. Graffiti, the city's unofficial chronicle, preserves voices that official records tried to erase. Gaius loves Marcus forever, Julia kisses her friend in secret, or even crude jokes about the passive and the active, all speak of lives fully lived in the shadow of social hierarchies and moral codes. These inscriptions, etched into walls and pottery, remind us that love is not only performed for power or status, it is also a deeply human need, quietly asserted, carefully preserved, and boldly declared in small acts of writing, carving, and artistry. Literature too served as a vessel for memory. Martial, Juvenal, and Ovid, each in their way, documented the humor, longing, and complexity of desire. Poetry preserved emotions that politics, law, and morality tried to suppress. Sulpicius' fragments, playful and intimate, provide rare insight into women's experiences of love, often hidden, always delicate, yet real. Even the scandalous stories of Caesar and Nicomedes or Nero and Sporus survived, remembered not just for intrigue but for the truths they reveal about human desire across ages and ranks. The spread of Christianity reshaped moral landscapes, yet it could not entirely erase the past. Where laws condemned, art and memory survived. Temples to Antinous, festivals in honor of youthful beauty, and statues scattered across the empire became silent witnesses to a culture of love that transcended gender, hierarchy, and time. In secret chambers, behind closed doors, or in private correspondence, Romans continued to love as they had always loved, preserving the invisible continuity of passion through generations. By the fall of Rome in the 5th century, overt expressions of same-sex love were increasingly rare and often dangerous. Yet the traces remained, whispering through the centuries in Renaissance marble copies of Antinous, in manuscripts preserving Martial's epigrams, in hidden inscriptions discovered in the dust of Pompeii. These remnants serve as reminders that desire, affection, and devotion endure, even when societies attempt to silence them. To reflect on Rome's legacy is to recognize the complexity of human love. Desire was never merely physical, it was intertwined with power, social standing, and identity. It could affirm, challenge, or even defy societal norms. It could inspire devotion, art, and poetry, yet also provoke scandal, shame, or punishment. The Romans understood the fragility and resilience of intimacy in ways both subtle and profound, and it is this understanding, preserved across millennia, that speaks to us today. Rome's lovers, male and female, patrician and slave, active and passive, left a world behind that is both astonishingly familiar and startlingly different from our own. Their stories are recorded not just in history books, but in every surviving artifact, in every fragment of poetry, in every inscription on the walls. They remind us that the human heart is a constant across the ages, seeking, desiring, connecting, and persisting against all odds. In every stolen glance, whispered word, or sculpted smile, the legacy of Roman love endures, a testament to passion that refuses to be forgotten. And so, as we step away from the marble streets, From the shadowed corridors and perfumed gardens of ancient Rome, we carry with us the knowledge that love, in all its forms, was not incidental to this great civilization. It was, and remains, a vital pulse beneath the grandeur of empire, quietly shaping history, art, and memory. The whispers of desire from centuries past continue to resonate, reminding us that even in a world governed by law and hierarchy, the human heart always finds a way to speak, to connect, and to endure.